On a cold autumn morning, Prosecutor Olivia Novak stood before the courtroom, delivering her closing arguments in the case that had captivated the city. The defendant, Rachel, sat quietly in her seat, eyes fixed on the floor. She had been charged with a crime that Olivia was beginning to suspect she hadn't committed. Months earlier, Rachel had been convicted of embezzling over $200,000 from the corporation she worked for as a financial analyst. The evidence had seemed airtight. Bank records showed large sums of money funneled into an account under Rachel's name. Her fingerprints were found on several incriminating documents, and she had no alibi for the times the transfers occurred. But as the trial progressed, Olivia began to notice inconsistencies. Rachel's defense attorney had been inept, presenting little challenge to the prosecution's case. But Olivia's own investigation, out of curiosity and perhaps a nagging doubt, uncovered unsettling details. Rachel's behavior didn't match that of someone who had orchestrated a complex financial crime. She wasn't extravagant, and her modest lifestyle seemed far removed from someone who had pocketed a small fortune. Olivia prided herself on her integrity and her sharp legal mind. She had spent years prosecuting criminals, convinced of their guilt before stepping into the courtroom. But Rachel's case gnawed at her. What if this woman was innocent? What if the system, the one she trusted, had gotten it wrong? The turning point came when Olivia stumbled upon an old email chain while reviewing documents. The emails were between Rachel and her boss, a man with a reputation for charm and manipulation. Olivia began to see a pattern of control, suggestions that Rachel handle the company finances a certain way, and instructions that Rachel, out of loyalty, had followed without question. It was subtle, but it planted the seed of doubt in Olivia's mind. Could Rachel have been set up to take the fall for her superior's crimes? Late one evening, Olivia sat in her office, going over the case files once more. She found a missing link. The account where the embezzled money was transferred had been opened not by Rachel, but by her boss using her credentials. He had used her, orchestrating the entire scheme while ensuring all signs pointed to her guilt. The discovery hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. Rachel, who had endured months of public humiliation, legal battles, and the threat of years in prison, was innocent. Olivia was certain now that the real culprit was still walking free, possibly laughing at the system he had duped. But there was one problem. Olivia wasn't just any lawyer in this case, she was the prosecutor. How could she, in good conscience, continue to argue for Rachel's conviction knowing what she knew? The next morning, Olivia made the toughest decision of her career. Standing in court, she requested a private meeting with the judge. In that closed room, Olivia confessed that she had found new evidence. Evidence that pointed to Rachel's innocence. It was a confession that could damage her career, but her integrity left her no choice. The judge, shocked, agreed to postpone sentencing and reopen the investigation. Rachel, her hands trembling, whispered a thank you to Olivia as they left the courtroom. Weeks later, after a new investigation confirmed Olivia's findings, Rachel was exonerated. Her boss was arrested, and Olivia, though lauded by some for her bravery, faced criticism from others for letting the case proceed so far. But as Olivia stood in the rain outside the courthouse, watching Rachel leave with her family, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had chosen justice over victory, and for that, she had no regrets. Months passed since Rachel's exoneration, and Olivia Novak had returned to her office, carrying the weight of the decision she had made. While she was lauded in some legal circles for her ethical choice, the case had left her career in a precarious position. Her superiors were less forgiving. To some, Olivia's actions undermined the credibility of the prosecution's office. Whispers about her judgment floated in the hallways, and cases were reassigned without explanation. Meanwhile, Rachel, despite her newfound freedom, struggled to rebuild her life. She had spent months imprisoned for a crime she hadn't committed, and the stain of the accusation clung to her like a shadow. Jobs were hard to find, her friends kept a careful distance, and the media, which had once hounded her, moved on, leaving her to pick up the pieces in silence. One cold November evening, Olivia found herself at a quiet bar, nursing a drink. The cases she had taken on recently were trivial, petty thefts, misdemeanors that barely challenged her intellect. She had once been a rising star, her career defined by victories in high-profile cases. Now, she was starting to wonder if she had destroyed that trajectory by choosing to follow her conscience. She didn't notice Rachel when she first entered the bar. The two women hadn't spoken since the day Olivia uncovered the truth. When Rachel sat down next to her, Olivia's first instinct was to apologize. But before she could say a word, Rachel spoke. "You saved my life," Rachel said quietly, her voice steady but laced with the pain of everything she had endured. Olivia shook her head, setting her glass down. "I should have seen it sooner. I'm the one who put you there in the first place." Rachel studied her for a moment. "You're not the one who framed me. And when you knew the truth, you did the right thing. That's more than most people would have done. There was a long pause between them, the noise of the bar fading into the background. They were two women tied together by a tragic mistake, one who had paid the price, and the other who had fought to correct it. Yet both of them had lost something irreparable. I still don't know what's next, Rachel admitted. Everyone says I should be grateful that I'm free, but I don't feel free. It's like everything's still broken.
Olivia nodded.
She understood in ways she hadn't anticipated. I'm not sure what's next for me either. Rachel glanced at her, eyebrows raised in surprise.
You?
You're one of the best prosecutors in the state.
You'll be fine. Maybe.
But after everything, I'm not sure if this is where I belong anymore. I've spent my whole career believing in the system. Now I don't know if I can. They sat in silence for a while, both staring at their drinks. Eventually, Rachel leaned forward, her voice soft but resolute. You might feel lost right now, but you did something no one else would have done. You gave me my life back. That means something. Olivia's throat tightened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her guilt begin to lift, if only slightly. I just wish I could have done more, she whispered. Rachel offered her a small, bittersweet smile.
You did enough.
Weeks passed, and Olivia tried to immerse herself in her work, but her heart wasn't in it. She had once thrived on the thrill of the courtroom, the rush of securing a conviction, but now, every case felt like a hollow exercise. She kept thinking about Rachel and all the others who might have been wrongfully convicted, who didn't have someone like her to dig deeper. She had lost her trust in the system, and without that, she knew she couldn't continue the way she had before. One evening, after another day of meaningless motions and hearings, Olivia made a decision. She walked into her supervisor's office and handed in her resignation. The shock on his face didn't bother her, nor did the questions he threw at her. What would she do next? Why leave after one mistake? What could be more important than her career? But Olivia had made up her mind. She knew what was next. Several months later, a small nonprofit opened its doors in the city. It was a legal aid organization focused on investigating wrongful convictions and helping those trapped by a justice system that too often failed them. Olivia, now the head of the organization, found a new sense of purpose in her work. One afternoon, while reviewing the case of a young man sentenced to life for a crime he swore he hadn't committed, Olivia received a visitor. Rachel stood in the doorway, holding a box of office supplies. I heard you might need help, Rachel said, a smile playing on her lips. Olivia smiled back. Always. Together, they set up Rachel's new desk, two women who had been bound by a broken system, now united in their fight to fix it. Neither of them could change the past, but they were determined to make sure that no one else suffered the same fate. It wasn't a perfect world, and the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt a sense of peace. She had found her path again.
And Rachel?
She had finally reclaimed her life, piece by piece. Months turned into years, and Olivia's nonprofit gained traction, slowly becoming a beacon for those seeking justice. Cases of wrongful conviction, which had once been swept under the rug, were now brought into the light, thanks to her tireless efforts. The team she built, small but dedicated, took on cases that larger firms ignored. Every time they freed an innocent person, it felt like a small victory against a system that was still flawed but slowly being held accountable. Rachel became more than just an assistant. She threw herself into the work, learning the intricacies of legal research, organizing files, and even comforting the families of those still trapped behind bars. The skills she had honed during her own ordeal, her persistence, attention to detail, and resilience, were now used to help others. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior. One case, however, would test them both more than any other. It involved a man named Carlos, who had been in prison for nearly 2 decades, accused of a violent robbery in which no one had died but where significant evidence pointed to his guilt. However, Carlos had always maintained his innocence, and when his family came to Olivia's organization, they were on the verge of giving up hope. The deeper Olivia and Rachel dug, the more troubling the case became. Like Rachel's, Carlos' conviction was built on circumstantial evidence, with weak defense representation and a prosecution eager to close the case. Witnesses had recanted, forensic evidence had been improperly handled, and yet, year after year, appeals were denied. The months of investigating Carlos' case felt like a return to Rachel's darkest days, but this time she was on the other side. She was relentless, pushing Olivia and the team harder than ever. Olivia admired her drive, knowing that Rachel's motivation came from a place of deep empathy. She couldn't save herself from what she had endured, but she would do everything she could to save Carlos. Finally, after nearly a year of work, Olivia and Rachel discovered a key piece of evidence that had been overlooked: a fingerprint on a piece of stolen jewelry that matched someone else. The real culprit had been found, and it was enough to bring the case back to court. The day of Carlos' hearing was tense. Olivia stood before the judge, making the case for his innocence with the same passion she had once used to convict people. Now, she was on the other side, fighting for justice in a way she hadn't before. Rachel sat behind her, her heart racing, knowing exactly what it felt like to sit in Carlos' shoes, waiting for someone to believe the truth. When the judge finally declared Carlos innocent and overturned his conviction, the courtroom erupted. Carlos wept, his family rushed to embrace him, and Olivia closed her eyes, feeling a wave of relief.
They had won.
Another innocent life had been freed. As the court cleared out, Olivia and Rachel stood alone for a moment, watching Carlos reunite with his family. The victory was bittersweet, as they both knew that no amount of compensation could give Carlos back the years he had lost. Rachel turned to Olivia, her eyes shining with emotion.
We did it.
Olivia smiled, though there was a sadness in her gaze.
Yeah, we did.
But there are so many more out there. We still have a long way to go. Rachel nodded, understanding completely. But for the first time in years, she felt truly free, not just from the false conviction that had nearly destroyed her life, but from the fear that had held her back from moving forward. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was making a difference. Later that evening, after the celebration had died down, Olivia and Rachel found themselves back at the office, sitting side by side. The night was quiet, and the weight of their work hung between them. But it wasn't oppressive, it was a reminder of their purpose. You know, Rachel said softly, if someone had told me years ago that I'd end up here doing this, I would have thought they were crazy.
Olivia chuckled. Yeah, me too.
Funny how life works out. Rachel looked at Olivia, her expression thoughtful. You gave me a second chance, Olivia. I'll never forget that. Olivia met her gaze, shaking her head. You fought for yourself, Rachel.
I just helped.
And now we're fighting for others. That's what matters. A comfortable silence settled between them as they looked out the window at the city, illuminated by the streetlights below. The battle for justice would never end, but they had each other. And together, they were unstoppable. In the years to come, Olivia and Rachel would face more challenges, more heartbreaks, and more triumphs. But they had learned that justice wasn't about winning or losing, it was about standing up for what was right, even when the world tried to convince you otherwise.
And in that truth, they found their peace.
Together, they would continue the fight, one life at a time.